I went from feeling like everything that my partner Fred Wilson and I had touched as investors was turning to gold, to everything that we touched was turning to lead.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
Hi, everyone. It's Jessica and Patty. Today, we are so thrilled to have as our guest my colleague and good friend, Jerry Colonna. Jerry's the CEO and founder of Reboot.io, and he's written a couple of really great books, a new one that's coming out called Reunion. Jerry and I met, 5 or 6 years ago now, where I went to do a panel that I wasn't even that interested in. And this guy called me up and said, come have coffee with me. And we couldn't stop having coffee. If we'd had drinks, we would have been there all day. And Jerry and I discovered that we were kind of like brothers and sisters from we were Vulcan mind meld. And so I'm really happy to have you be here with us today and to meet Jessica and spend some time with her so that the three of us can have a great conversation. I was telling Jessica about you, and I said, you know what I love about Jerry is that he allows himself to be so vulnerable. I mean, you tell stories about yourself and your childhood, and they're embarrassing stories and they're open stories. But I think that because you allow yourself to do that, it makes it easier to be an asshole when you need to. It's like, I opened my soul to you. So you better be honest with me. And I think it's something we both have in common. It's like this ability to just tell it like it is. And so that's kind of the through line of our whole podcast series, Jerry, which is we want to get under the stories and the truths that the three of us know because we've just been working with people and leaders for so long. So that's where we want to sort of jump in and get going.
First of all, so excited to talk to you. Patty has just said so many wonderful things. And I loved Reboot. But, tell us a little bit about how this all got started, because I've gotten the insight into that reading the book, but I think everybody will kind of want to know, like, what prompted you to become this, I guess they call you the CEO whisperer. What happened?
He yells sometimes, though. He doesn't always whisper.
And he curses all the time. The first thing I want to say is thanks for having me on. And Patty, the way I remember our origin story is there was this moment when we were on stage together, and it was at South by Southwest. And we were fielding a bunch of questions from the audience, and someone asked about like firing an employee and the problem there. And Patty and I both looked at each other and we said something like, well, who was the asshole who hired them? And that's when we knew we were separated at birth. Right, exactly. So, that just felt important to note. So the origin story, Jessica, so how did I go from, say, being a venture capitalist to being a Zen Buddhist monk living on a farm outside of Boulder, Colorado? Well, the truth is that it passed through my own breakdown. It passed through my late 30s when, and yes, it was at a time when the world once more seemed like it was going through hell in a handbasket, right? We seem to be back in that place right now. But this was right around 2001, prior to 9/11, but passed through 9/11 into 2002. I went from feeling like everything that my partner Fred Wilson and I had touched as investors was turning to gold, to everything that we touched was turning to lead. And so what it did was it brought back this massive depression and you've read Reboot, so you know that depression and I are old friends. We're on a first name basis. And what I began to realize was that the way I had been living my life was false. And to Patty's point about me being vulnerable, Patty, I don't even think of it as vulnerable anymore. I think of it as honest, like no bullshit.
Yeah. One of the things I've been talking about a lot when I speak now is I wish that I hadn't used the word radical honesty, the phrase radical honesty in my book, because it's nothing radical about it. Right? I mean, and we've made such a big deal about just telling the truth.
Yeah. Somebody asked me the other day, like, what made me a great leader? And I said, I'm not sure I was a great leader, but I told the truth and I had their back.
Right. Right.
And I think that set me apart from some of the other folks.
Right.
And Jerry, I got to tell you, so when we were talking about you the other day, talking about having you on the show, I said, Jessica, I just got Jerry's book. And here's what he wrote me in the foreword. Thanks for believing in me. And we got off on this conversation about if people believe that you believe in them, right? You think they can do it and you're on their side, then that honesty part is not just like something that's nice to do that we've practiced doing. You have to.
Right. When I do talks with new to leadership folks, I will make this point about being honest. And let's be clear, being honest begins with being honest with oneself. Because really the worst aspect of it is a kind of delusional state where we pretend that we've got it all figured out. I used to do this joke when I'd start a talk. I'd get really quiet. I'd lean in. I'd get the CEO whispery voice going.
Is that it?
Yeah.
That's close. That's pretty close. And then I would raise my hand and I'd say, raise your hand if you haven't a fucking clue as to what you're doing. And all these hands would go up and everybody would laugh because somebody punctured the bubble, the pretense bubble that actually makes us feel like shit. Because what we're not told is that feeling like we don't know what we're doing is part of the territory.
Right.
Feeling like we're driving down the road without a map or GPS is exactly the process.
And the strength that comes from adrenaline, right? Yeah. Like that rush of like, I am so fucking scared. I am going to screw this up and I have no other choice. So I just have to jump in now. It prompts me to think about, you've been doing this for so long. This is a cliche, but has the CEO persona changed over the years? Are people more humble now? Jessica, you too. Jessica's VC now. So,
following in your footsteps.
We're all going in circles here. So she's working with them too now. So what do you guys think?
Well, what do you think, Jessica?
I don't know. Well, I don't know if it's humbleness, but I don't think to your point, Jerry, the acceptance of I have to do this work too is there. There's the pretending and the I've got all the answers. And when they don't have all the answers, they go focus on the things where they feel more comfortable and they feel like they have the answers and they are waiting for someone to kind of pick up the slack somewhere else, or they're telling, hey, why don't you go do that stuff? Because it's uncomfortable for them. So I see that there's a lot of when it's uncomfortable, they go to revenue or they go, to product where they feel like they can have more success.
Right.
But, I don't know if it's not humble, but I think they haven't done the work themselves to really know how to be a leader. And most of the folks that I'm working with are founder CEOs, which, they've never been a CEO before. And they had this great idea and it's turned into a company, some small, some big, and they're just learning as they go. And admitting that is, I think, a very hard thing to do.
I would agree with everything you've said, Jessica, but I would nuance it just a little bit differently. Partially because I'm so old, I have this vantage point that goes back. Somebody reminded me last week, 40 years.
I know, me too. I used to say, oh, I've lived here 30 years. I'm like, wait, my son's 36.
Right. Okay. So I think that there has been a difference. There has been a shift. I don't know that I would qualify it as more humble. I would say that there's even been a shift in the 20, 22 years that I've been coaching, which is that it's much less shame producing to say that I have a coach or to say that I need help. In fact, it's a little bit of a badge of honor.
I think that's true. Like getting a coach is sort of like a cool club. Like you got a coach.
Yeah. So that I actually think is really important. And I also think that there's been a shift to more allowance of talking about these issues. I mean, 8, 9 years ago, I would give talks and people were talking about how bad this depression was for first-time CEOs to the point where we were doing stories about suicide on a regular basis. I did an interview with she was at CNN at the time, Lori Siegel, where she talked about the unspoken of secret of this widespread epidemic of depression and suicide that we're dealing with. And I think it's a little easier there. But to Jessica's point, what we still have, and this is quite honestly for folks who identify as men, folks who identify as women, this is for first-time CEOs, this is for founders. What we still have problems with is running up against this internal vision of who we're supposed to be as adults. We are supposed to have it all figured out. We're supposed to never question ourselves. We're supposed to, it's like there's this continuous discovery that, again, everybody's kind of making it up as we go along.
And always has been.
Always
right?
has been.
I mean, it's
And
always has been.
will.
But nobody knows that. I mean, I always think it's funny when, and you get this too, I'm sure, you're the guru of culture change. So how did you achieve that wisdom? I'm like, I don't know. I just sort of paid attention, made shit up as I went along. I mean, isn't that what everybody does?
Yeah.
And there's this, I also feel this tension now between looking for meaning at work and finding meaning doing work. So like what I'm saying is like sometimes the meaning is you just get to be together with other really smart people and figure some hard ass problem out. And that can give you meaning too.
Yeah, I mean, I want to build on that, Patty, because you and I have talked about this before. I think one of the other things that we've noticed is that there is this, especially given the crap that we have gone through as a society these last 5 years. And, we've got pandemic, we've got a land war in Europe, we've got a massive dislocating, dehumanizing war. We've got just in our small circle of the world, and I don't mean to create a false equivalency here, but we've got WeWork going from $47 billion valuation to $41 million valuation. I mean, this is a mind fuck, what's going on. And again, I don't mean to say that those are equivalent. These are all just forces at play. And I think that part of the experience is it undermines our sense of, am I safe? Is this okay? And then what rushes in is a very human tendency to denigrate ourselves because we feel so bad.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Jerry, kind of hitting on that and hitting on what you were talking about with the depression, with leaders, CEOs. We talk about it in Reboot, but it's this whole concept of loneliness, right? And when you have those feelings and you also feel incredibly lonely, that there isn't anyone to talk to. And oftentimes there's not. I mean, people are looking to you. So what have you experienced with some of the folks that you've coached on that dimension, and what sort of advice can you give us?
Well, one of the core traps that we build for ourselves, and yes, it's CEOs, but it's kind of all of us in all circumstances. One of the traps that we build in which we exacerbate the loneliness is the belief that we're the only one who goes through this, or worse, we're the belief that we have to have it all figured out. You know, if we go back to some of the things we were saying before about vulnerability and my preferred word, honesty. I once had a client who, venture-backed CEO, and at the very last minute, the venture firm, which shall remain nameless, pulled the term sheet. And he had already celebrated raising the money with the team. And he called me up in a panic and he said, "What do I tell the team? I don't know what to say." Because he was worried that if they get the news, they're going to leave. And I said, "Well, how about the truth?" And he said, "If I tell them the truth, they're all going to leave." And so then my famous line was, "Would you rather have them stay for a lie?"
Oh, God.
Okay.
I mean, Jessica, tell them this story that you just told me last week about overhiring and the CEO and the layoff. This was like last week's story.
It was the same thing. And coaching a CEO and doing a layoff. And we're talking through the comms. It's like, okay, like probably say this. And I'm like, well, no. Why don't you just tell them the truth? Like, you overhired and made a mistake. And you have to do this, for the business.
Right.
And you feel really bad and it's super shitty, but you got to do it. Right. And so anyways, he was like, "Oh, the truth." Well, I
always love when people come in and they say, they spew about how fucked up things are. My boss is an idiot. The company's my boss. And I'm like, "Oh my God, what did she say when you told her that?" And they'll say, I couldn't possibly tell her that. I'm like, "Well, you just told me."
Right.
So, I mean, the words are there. The situation's there. It leads me to a little bit about reunion, Jerry, and I want to talk about that too. One of the things that really struck me and has played in my mind ever since I read the book was one of the questions you ask is, how am I complicit in the things that I don't want to be true?
Right.
I mean, Jessica and I talked about this the other day too. It was like, it made me think like of all those years coaching women in business, telling them to nut up. Right.
Yeah.
Like you're never going to be heard unless you get more aggressive and you take a stance and, you talk, you gotta be a man to be successful.
One of those women.
Yeah, I know, probably. Yeah. And how I was literally unknowns to part of the problem, like creating this self-perpetuating prophecy. When we'd sit around and we'd say, "Wow, we got a big problem. How are we going to solve it? Let's promote somebody to do it."
Right.
And I always had to say, "What about Jessica?" Because no one in the room ever did that. And yet I was complicit in the same process. I mean, it's such a good message for us, I think, as we go forward. I want to hear more detail about it.
It's a nuanced stance, and I want to make a distinction. So in Reboot, the question that I formulated and I've been using for years is, how have I been complicit, not responsible, not guilty, complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? I use the word complicit purposefully because I think about the word accomplice. I think about the guy who drives the getaway car, not the guy who sticks up the bank teller. Okay. And this is important because it helps us unpack the subroutines, the learned lessons, the limiting beliefs that we grew up with, right? And so a learned belief might be, I'm a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
And so how I really feel is not something that I share.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get a coach like me step in and say, "Well, how come you all don't trust each other?" Well, we don't talk about the truth. So, right? And so there's a complicity that goes on here. And this is important because a lot of times people hear that question and they internalize it as responsibility.
No, I thought that was really powerful when I heard you say that, because I do think that's true.
Yeah, because one of the limiting beliefs that we learn as children is that we're responsible for the entire world.
Uh-huh.
It's called magical thinking. Mom and dad are fighting, so I will be a really good kid, right? And so we then carry that over into adulthood and we continue it. So that's the core of everything we do, everything I do as a coach. In Reunion, I turned the question a little bit externally and I said, how have I been complicit in and benefited from the conditions in the world I say I don't want to see? Now, this is a really important move because it goes from my internal state. Like, for example, a few months ago, I was working with a group of CEOs and one woman raised her hand and she said, I'm so sick and tired of my team. None of them can make a decision without me. And I said, who hired them? And she started to smile and laugh. And she's like, well, I said, what's the benefit to you that they can't make a decision without you? And she said, I stay in control. I said, okay, now we know what the issue is. Well, in Reunion, what I tried to do, look, I'll tell this story. It was the summer of 2020, and the world was racked by Black Lives Matter protests and the murder of George Floyd. And we all saw that video. And I would have the normal response that a good liberal, white, cisgender, straight man would have. That sucks. That's terrible. But fortunately for me, I have a fierce as fuck 31-year-old daughter who looks at me and goes, yeah, right. Dad, it's not enough to be an ally. You have to be a co-conspirator. And she put her body on the line. She went out and protested. And she faced down pepper spray. And what was I doing? And that became the impulse for me looking at a much, much broader question, which is, okay, I have a responsibility to manage this meat bag known as me. Okay, I cannot spew my unresolved shit onto you all and say, please clean up my mess. Thank you very much. But I also have this other responsibility. Dan Harris, my friend and client, was explaining Reunion to his 9-year-old son. And Alexander said to him, what's it all about? And he says, well, remember Uncle Ben, Peter Parker, Spider-Man's uncle, saying, with great power comes great responsibility? I was like, yeah. So I assert that those of us who have power have a responsibility to walk and chew gum at the same time, meaning run a really good business that's fiscally sound, that builds, as another client once said, dope shit, that hires great people, and not shy away from tough questions.
I mean, well, I want to be like you when I grow up, but I think that's amazing. And obviously you had a journey that got you there, but I don't know how many CEOs get there.
There's another theme that I think is really important, as important as the notion of complicity, not responsibility. And in one of the chapters in Reunion, I quote from the Talmud. And Rabbi Tarfon says, about the world, it is not up to you to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect the work. Okay, so you're not going to get there. Big fucking deal. Okay, do not let the fear or the belief that you're not going to be the best possible CEO you can be, the best possible adult you can be, don't let that stop you from trying.
I get so tired of the D&I, DEI, the whole diversity. And yet, to really do something about it, to really change our lives and our work is work. Right?
Yes.
It's not publishing the numbers. I met a Netflix guy who's a VP, and he said, "You'd be so proud of me. I have 8 direct reports on my team, and 3 of them are women. I'm really, moving towards equality." I'm like, for Christ's sake, you're a mathematician. 3 isn't the right number, right? I mean, it's thank you for trying so hard.
Well,
Right.
But that is the problem. People don't want to do the work.
But what I love about Jerry's book is partly, I think, that people don't want to do the work because they don't know what the work is. And they don't know that the work is inside of them. So when Jerry and I talked about when he started writing Reunion, when you were at my house, I think, and you were telling me about it, I'm like, oh yeah, smart idea, guy. White guy talks about Black Lives Matter. You go with that, see how it rolls.
Right.
And I mean, that examination that you do about like each of us comes prepackaged, right? Each of us comes predetermined with our own shit. And it's not just the shit that's in the D&I training.
Yeah.
I do not believe, and I never want to have this equation that what I refer to as the reunion process is somehow a substitute for actually doing the labor of recruiting and building teams that matter in the ways we're talking about matter.
Yep.
But there is pre-work that needs to be done. And the pre-work, I mean, when we look at those efforts and when those efforts fall short or fall into the category of performative, everybody suffers.
Yeah.
Everybody suffers. And what stops us from actually doing the work is that we are unwilling to look ourselves in the mirror and say, oh shit, what did Pogo say? I have met the enemy and it is us. Right? This is, Pogo reference speaks to how old I am.
Jessica's going,
for all the kids listening, go Google who Pogo was. But this is, Rhonda McGee, who's a brilliant Buddhist teacher, writes in her book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. This is what's lacking and it's lacking not just on equity issues, it's lacking on leadership issues. This is my main point. We have to define successful leadership as more than just return on investment. Because if you just want to define it as return on investment, sell fucking fentanyl. You'll make more money. Okay? But clearly we're making a moral decision already when we say we're not going to do things that are illegal.
right.
So once we make that stance, you have an obligation to go be moral.
Yeah.
I make reference to this internet meme cartoon that's a New Yorker cartoon in the Reunion book. And that is, you know that image of a bunch of kids sitting around a campfire and one is dressed up as like in a raggedy old business suit. And he says something like, for one glorious minute, our profits exceeded whatever number, right? And clearly, at the end of the world, what do we want? When I have descendants, I want to look them in the eye and basically say, I did my best. I did my best. And it's not instead of building a profitable business. It's in addition to building a profitable business.
Yeah.
Because work is a place that you get to do something you don't get to do anywhere else in your life.
Mm.
It's a really, really special place. And without joy, it's just work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, you were talking about coming in with all the pre-programming, right? Oh, work sucks.
Right.
My boss is the worst.
My boss is Monday, here you come again.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm so there with you on the deep work gives you the deep joy. Mm-hmm. And if I look back on my career at the things like I'm so proud of Jessica, when people I believe in turn out to be so successful and have influence on the world too. Right. And I think just the one thing I wanted to comment on that is there are descendants too.
Yes.
As leaders, the people that we work with are our descendants. I mean, I often say, build a great place to be from.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite Pattyisms. Is that phrase?
That is a Pattyism.
Yeah. I will add to that, and I say that the true measure of a leader is how many leaders they've helped create.
Yeah.
I think that's so true. And people do not, to your point, they judge leaders on sort of the return on investment that they get and the success that they have within the business, but they don't judge them on their descendants and the people that they've brought into the business. And a lot of times they don't bring great people in the business because they don't actually know what great is. Or that's not where they're spending their time in terms of, developing them and inspiring them.
Yeah.
So on this whole coaching thing, there's a lot of skepticism about it, right? Just in terms of it being very expensive and not very helpful all the time. So what is the truth about that? Is it, successful, and is it only successful with you, or are you?
Yes. No, I have 15 other colleagues who are coaches. There's a lot packed in that. First of all, I kind of laugh when we talk about how expensive it is. How expensive is it when you have a founding CEO who doesn't know what they're doing?
Super expensive.
And who are failing? So, I still have strains of being a VC in me. And, if spending $60,000 to $100,000 a year to improve the chance of your $5 million investment, creating a return on investment, seems like a pretty easy trade-off.
I got to tell you, I was a total cynic about it. Complete cynic about it.
Of course.
It's like, okay, look, if you're going to be a VP, then be a VP, goddammit. Stand up, assume the responsibility, do the job. And plus, during the .com happy bubble burst thing, I remember talking with the founder CEO, and he's like, yeah, she's really improved my yoga stance. And, I'm meditating more. I'm like, you're losing money hand over fist. Hello. He's like, well, I can't go to the office because it's really stressful. And, the hard ass Patty in me is like, you're the CEO.
You have to go to the office.
Well, I think there was and still is. It's like any other kind of consultative relationship.
That's right.
There's good folks, there's bad folks, there's right folks for you, there's wrong.
Is it only Jerry? Because there's lots of coaches out there.
And the truth is, it's not only Jerry, but the truth is also there's a very low bar on, there is in fact no regulation about who can call themselves a coach. There are people who are out there coaching who have actually not even gone through coach training.
Or worked.
And
or worked. No, I'm telling you, I meet them. I'm a life coach. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. How old are you? 28?
Yeah, right.
A lot of life lived.
Well, just, I sure hope you can help 70-year-old me live a better life.
Yeah. Well, what I'll say this, on a pragmatic basis, the way we contract is on a month-to-month basis. Sure. And I think that that's an important signal, because if people are not seeing value,
then they shouldn't do it anymore.
In the relationship.
Yeah.
What is your success rate?
Tell me what success means, and I'll tell you.
You feel like, as a CEO, they were incrementally better, like by,
100%. I'm teasing, but I think that on a personal basis, I think that the average length of time that someone has worked with me is 7 to 10 years.
Wow.
On a month-to-month basis.
Wow. That's
so
incredible.
They can leave anytime.
Yeah. And they don't.
They don't.
They're descendants now.
Yeah.
Well, one of my
but
favorite stories is I started working with a client when he was employed at a company where I was a coach, and he had an idea to launch a new business. That was 11 years ago. He left, launched a new business, asked me to continue working with him. I continued working with him. The company is doing about $1 billion a year in revenue. It has 800 employees, and he recently stepped down as CEO and stepped up into the executive chair role. And he's living his best life.
That's great.
And the COO who stepped in and took over as CEO, it's one of the best groups of board members I've ever seen. We've gone in, we've done 360 reviews on the board.
Wow.
They have job descriptions for the board. They have performance reviews that they do for themselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a highly functional, boring as shit, drama-free company that just fucking makes money.
That's amazing.
And people like each other. Right? You can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Concept. What a concept, I tell you.
Well, I talk about that from Netflix all the time, Patty, because, as direct and transparent we were with each other, we still liked each other, right?
Yeah.
And we liked being at work together. It was fun.
Yeah.
Right.
I had to change my spiel after I wrote my book because I talk a lot about, we're a team, not a family. And so people would read my book and they'd meet me and they'd say, wow, you're actually kind of nice. And warm and friendly. I mean, I always thought you're the person that walked in and it's like, fire, 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 get rid of them, get rid of them.
Patty, what you are is you're direct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where we resonated so much.
But so I've changed my message to say, look, this does not mean you won't make relationships at work with people that will last the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's right.
That you love. You love them, right? And it's a different kind of relationship, and that's okay too. I mean, half the people I hang out with now, I live in a town where I've lived for 40 years. And I run into people because I've worked at a couple of companies here and they're like, oh, Patty, do you remember me? I'm like, did I hire you or fire you? Or like both twice.
Both
Right.
likely.
Right.
Jerry, one other question, just because it's on my mind. I worked for a founder CEO for a lot of my career. And now I work with a lot of founder CEOs in VC.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing you work with both career CEOs and founder CEOs. Do you find
and a lot of VCs.
Right. Do you find a big difference between the founder CEO and the career CEO, someone that's not a founder?
Yeah, I think, you said something before, Jessica, which I really resonated, which is that the founder CEO tends to, when the stress level gets really high, they tend to revert to their original identity.
Yeah.
So if you've got the product-driven founding CEO, they're going to go into product. If, I have a client, he's just recently transitioned. We worked together for 16 years. They have 6,000 employees. When we started working together, they had 30 employees.
Wow.
I always knew that he was in trouble when he would spend his Saturday night coding. And I would say to him, you have 200 at the time, 200 engineers. What the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
And he's like, what? And what was going on was that he was scared.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what I find with what you're defining as the career CEO is that tendency tends to be less so.
Uh-huh. Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you've already made that mistake, right?
Yeah. We're having to wrap up, unfortunately, because this has been the best part of my day. So thank you for talking to us. Any final thoughts, words you have for the audience before we say goodbye?
I think our core point before about being honest, I think is a really, really important message. It's both what I'm feeling as you guys, and I would build upon that by saying, start with being honest with yourself, right? We do 360 performance reviews. We do this, we do that. But the most valuable thing a coach can do is be a mirror and say, look, you see what you're doing? Don't do that.
Yeah.
I used to say to Reed, I know what you said. I was in the room. I know the word you used, okay? Like you're not telling me anything I don't know. Let me tell you what they heard.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, well, Jerry, thank you again. And
Thank you.
Where can people find you if they want to know more about you? And
Well, right now, probably the best website to go to would be reunion.reboot.io.
okay,
And then you can follow me on Twitter at jerrycolonna.com or whatever we're calling it today.
your new book is out now. You can find it on Amazon and wherever else. Okay.
But if you don't want to make Jeff Bezos richer, you can also go to your local independent bookshop and buy it there. Either
Okay.
way is fine.
Okay.
And then there's the audio version and a Kindle digital version that's all
That's Jeff.
available as well.
You know.
I know, but
You
we
can't get
all
away
owe
from
Jeff
him.
something.
You can't get away from
You
him.
can't get away from him.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.